how to create depth inside of your mix predictably using reverb. To build our depth matrix, we're gonna be using 3 separate buses to send all of our items to in order to create depth inside of our mix. Basically, we're gonna be creating a front, middle, and back space inside of our mix to create the sense of depth with items that are close to us, middle, far away, and then also really far away from us. So let's start by adding and creating those 3 buses. So what I've done is I've just gone through and I've selected all the individual tracks inside of my mix to be able to send to one of those 3 buses. I did not select any of the actual buses, just the individual tracks. So here we go. We're gonna create our first bus, which is gonna be bus 21, bus 22, and bus 23. All right, and so I'm gonna send all of my items to the very first bus. If you don't know that shortcut, by the way, it's really handy. It's just, you hit the Option key, and then it'll automatically snap it to 0. It works for faders as well. Anything in your DAW in Logic, if you're using Logic, it's an awesome tool. Anyway, so let's dive over to our first bus, right? All of our items are going to this particular bus. Don't forget to send these buses back to your mix bus if you have that set up already. So, and we're gonna add a reverb to this. It does matter what reverb we use in this scenario because this is not meant to be an effect. So separate your mind from washy reverb. That's not our goal here. Washy reverb is an effect. Feel free to use that in your items on your mix in addition to this depth matrix, but it is not intended to be an effect, okay? I wanna make sure that's clear. So this is intended to only create distance or a perception of distance inside of our mix between items that are close, middle, and far away. So the first thing that we want to do though is still set up our room so that we want to have a reasonable room for the right kind of vibe for our mix overall, because there's still going to be that kind of sense of space. And so we want to make sure that sense of space makes sense for the song that we have. In this case, I'm just gonna use a large room. I'm thinking like this is gonna be more along the lines of a club or a live show than it is going to be comparatively to a like concert hall, right? I'm not going for a huge space, just a reasonably large one. So maybe let's not use a large room. Let's go big room. There we go. It's not that much different, but okay. So the first thing I'm gonna do is move my decay down. I like to use a quarter to a half note depending on the vibe. Let's take a listen and see what that sounds like right now. Yeah, that's reasonable. Not a huge space, but it sounds pretty good to me. So again, we're gonna be adjusting our pre-delay first. So this is going to be the front space. I did not label my buses, so let's go ahead and do that first. So this is gonna be the front, middle, and back. So let's adjust our front space here, and the pre-delay is going to be higher. That creates a perception of closeness. If you don't understand pre-delay, go back to my pre-delay video. It'll be linked in the description for you to be able to access that. Pre-delay can be very, very confusing, so make sure you're checking that out if you don't know exactly how to use pre-delay inside of your mix. So I'm gonna make this relatively high. Let's go 35 milliseconds. I think is what I used earlier, and it sounded pretty good. The distance I'm going to make as close-ish as possible. I could technically just leave this at 50% and I could still get by with it, but just for good measure, I'm gonna move that up. And then the details, I'm going to change the early-late reflection balance to mostly early reflections. Again, that's gonna create even more sense of closeness to us because the louder the early reflection are compared to the late reflections, the closer something is going to be perceived to us. Also, the entire balance of the entire reverb, early plus late reflections, is also going to create some perceived closeness as well if the direct sound is louder. So we're gonna implement that as well. So hang tight. And again, if you don't understand quite what early late reflections are, I have another video on that. So that is also linked in the description if you want to go check that out. But at the end of the day, all we're doing is adjusting the pre-delay to be higher, the distance to be closer, and the early late reflection to be leaning towards the early reflections than the late reflections to be able to create a sense of closeness. So if you just want to follow this exactly, this will create some depth in your mix as well. I'm just gonna do some quick reverb or some quick EQ here on the output just to prevent my mix from being a little bit too forward, too obvious, too muddy inside of the mix. So I'm taking some of this 2K out just because this mix was very, very strong in that 2K range anyway. So I want to make sure I'm cutting that out inside of this reverb. Okay, so the next step to do is, now that we have our first reverb set up, our front space, we want to basically copy that over to the next space. And we're only going to adjust those 3 parameters that actually create distance inside of our reverb. So we're going to change this pre-delay back down to, let's just say 14 milliseconds. The distance will be 50%. And then our early late reflection, let's just move that to 70-30. That should create a nice middle space for us. And then again, we're just going to copy that again to the back space. This is the back bus. And again, pre-delay is, let's move it down all the way down to 0. Distance to 90%, and then early late reflection, we'll do 40-60. So it's going to be mostly late reflections comparatively to early, but we still have some of those early reflections in there to represent how far away that bus is. So now we have everything set up. Now we need to decide what items go where inside of this mix. One argument that I have heard against this technique is you should never send your bass and your kick to a reverb. And inherently, I would generically agree, yeah, you shouldn't be using a ton of reverb on your bass and kick. But there's a couple things that doesn't actually make sense with that. So first of all, especially with the bass and kick, because I'm likely going to be sending those to the front and middle spaces, which have very little washy late reflection sound, which is what tends to build up inside of mixes. And also, the low end is completely cut out of this reverb. There's hardly any low end information allowed out because my EQ has shaved all of that stuff off. So it's very safe actually to add this reverb to your kick and your bass. So just as a FYI, feel free to add it to your kick and bass. It's not going to ruin your mix. And I've also done this and gotten paid hundreds of dollars to mix people's songs using this technique. And so nobody's ever complained about it to me. Let's dive in and actually start adding this to our items. My objective here is to add just a few items to the front, most of everything in the middle, and then just a few items in the back space. So that is the goal. So we're going to be very selective in terms of what we're sending to the back and front spaces, basically. Is going to be in the front. The snare is going to be in the front. I want those to be nice front and center. And then the toms will be in the middle. I think the rest of everything else here is going to be in the middle. So as overheads, toms, hats, all that stuff is going to be in the middle. Basses are going to be in the middle. Guitars can be pretty much all in the middle, except for, I think this clean guitar. Let's move that to the back. I think that'll be a good vibe. Yeah, let's move that to the back. And everything else is looking good. Let's do the electric guitars. Those are all going to be in the center as well. Piano, let's send that piano to the back. It's going to be cool in the back there. What are these synths doing? Yeah, send all those to the back. Yeah, those are all going to be the back. All right. Anything else? Yeah, that's sounding pretty good. Then our last one is the harmonies and lead vocals. So harmonies, I'm going to send all to the back. Even though there's a bunch of them, it's really kind of one item in my mind, and ultimately they're all kind of stuck together anyhow. And then the lead vocals is obviously going to be in the front of the mix. So here we go. Here is the full thing. Right now, it's way too reverby. We're going to have way too much reverb inside of the mix, as you can hear. Obviously, way too much stuff going on there. But what we're going to do is now back off these reverbs in the order of distance. So essentially, we want the front reverb. I usually end up somewhere around -16, so I'm just going to set it at -16 and call that good for now. This will be -13 and then -10. So again, I'm using my rule of 3. If you don't know my rule of 3, I have some other YouTube videos about that as well. But basically the premise is that the front reverb should be quieter than the middle, which should be quieter than the back. That's the basic premise that we're working with, okay? So because the louder that reverb is, overall, the further away that's going to be. So the louder the reverb, the further away it's going to be. So if we want to make something close, we're going to make that reverb quieter. So that's essentially what we're doing here. So I'm going to play this without any of this, and then I'm going to add it in so you can tell that sense of depth is just added to the mix once these reverbs are added. Also, you won't be able to tell very much in terms of the actual washy sound of the reverb. Again, that wasn't the goal of this matrix. The goal of the matrix is to create a sense of depth. So let's dive in and start.
It's not too much to pretend I'm fine, no. I thought you were done with me, so never mind. I don't care if you say I do, no. I was already moving on, so never mind. I don't care, so never mind, never mind.
Okay, so one more time, here's without.
It's not too much to pretend I'm fine, no. I thought you were done with me, so never mind. I don't care if you say I do, no.
All right, so as you'll have noticed in the A/B test, the actual sense of depth was pretty subtle in terms of you didn't hear all of the reverb washy sound, which again was not really the point of this. If you want a actual reverb sound, the washy sound, use a separate reverb, use the same reverb, but just, dial it in differently, or do whatever you want creatively inside of your mix. This was intended to create a sense of space in the mix. It's also using the same exact space in terms of the quality of the space, and so it's creating the sense of glue, but also separation between the various items in the mix. So this is an incredibly powerful technique to both add glue, but also separation at the same time inside of your mix.